Buckingham Palace, Thursday, June 25th, 2026. A brief, cold and calculated statement was quietly released from the royal offices, a historic bulletin that completely shattered the foundation of the modern British monarchy. King Charles III and Queen Camilla will not move back into Buckingham Palace, even after its massive £369 million facelift wraps up next year. Instead, they are staying put, making Clarence House their comfortable, heavily guarded sanctuary on the Mall their permanent home. To the public, the palace spun this decision as a masterclass in modern thriftiness, claiming it was designed to make the royal household run more efficiently and save money on the sovereign grant budget, while letting paying tourists flock to the grand state rooms. It was the perfect corporate story of a modern, streamlined royal family tightening its belt during tough economic times, framing Clarence House as a cosy, modest sanctuary far better suited for the daily routine of an aging King Charles III and Queen Camilla. But behind the locked gates of London and the perfectly kept lawns of Berkshire, seasoned royal experts and palace insiders saw straight through the spin. They knew this was not just some minor moving plan or a clever way to save public cash. No, this was the public proof of an quiet palace, coup, a cold and calculated administrative exile, and a complete shifting of the royal balance of power. The heavy question now echoing through the halls of Westminster and across global newsrooms was both deeply unsettling and incredibly dangerous. If the king is giving up the ultimate seat of British imperial power, who actually runs Buckingham Palace when the builders pack up and leave? And what does this shocking retreat say about who holds the real power in Britain? The truth buried under layers of polite public relations points to a massive quiet rewrite of the Constitution. While King Charles III retreats into the quiet, comfortable rooms of Clarence House, the real engine room of the monarchy has silently and permanently moved over to Adelaide Cottage, tucked away inside the private grounds of Windsor. This unassuming 19th century cottage is the actual home and office of Prince William and his wife Catherine, the Princess of Wales. High-ranking palace sources and senior civil servants have now confirmed that since the spring of 2026, almost all critical decisions of state, including royal finances, major household hirings, and long-term family plans, are being thoroughly examined, written up and signed off directly by the Prince of Wales. Prince William has basically taken over as the unofficial acting regent, quietly managing the daily run of the crown and mapping its survival before sending completed files over to Clarence House, purely for the aging king to apply his formal royal signature. This massive shift of control is definitely not some random accident or a matter of modern convenience, but the core of a highly strategic, multi-stage public relations counterattack planned by the next generation of the House of Windsor. Known inside the palace walls as the Transparency Initiative, this project is a complete break from the family's old rules of absolute secrecy and untouchable mystery. It is a highly corporate strategy built by Prince William's own team to carefully control how the world views a crown in transition. If you look closely at the timing of these announcements, the proof is undeniable. The bombshell news that they were giving up Buckingham Palace did not happen by accident. It was perfectly timed to land right alongside the shock release of King Charles III's private tax returns, showing a massive £12.9 million tax bill paid to the state. This sudden flash of openness was a highly calculated political move. By handing the public hard, undeniable proof that the king is actually paying a fortune in taxes, right as they announced he is permanently abandoning the National Palace, Prince William basically shut down any loud protests from anti-monarchy groups about royal waste or laziness. They essentially traded this financial transparency to secure public acceptance, buying a crucial social license to justify the king's shrinking public schedule and his quiet permanent move away from London, and his gradual, inevitable step back from exhausting daily public appearances, exactly as mapped out in their private transition books. But this grand, highly praised strategy of open financial books and clever administrative musical chairs is really just a shield, highly protective media shield built to hide a far more severe, deeply painful crisis tearing the royal family apart from the inside. While the world was busy staring at tax spreadsheets, arguing over the complex details of the sovereign grant, and getting distracted by the glamorous crowds at Royal Ascot, a brutal, uncompromising decree was quietly being pushed through behind locked doors. This cold executive order drawn up by the top lawyers inside the palace stripped Queen Camilla of her key public roles, her traditional patronages, and virtually all of her official ceremonial duties. Unlike the massive public drama of the abdication crisis of 1936 under King Edward VIII, or the messy, media-fueled wars of the 1992 separations, this modern coup went down in total, freezing silence. You saw no emotional television tell-alls, no desperate leaks to tabloid reporters, and absolutely no public signs of family fighting. Instead, the entire takeover was carried out with the cold, terrifyingly clinical efficiency of the British civil service buried deep inside the routine paperwork of the palace staff. The true trigger for this massive demotion, a move that ruined decades of hard-earned political and marital peace, did not start in June, but weeks earlier, during a tense, highly secret meeting that would rewrite the royal power structure forever. It was mid-May in the year 2026. The setting was a heavily secured, soundproofed briefing room hidden deep within the private apartments of Windsor Castle. This critical gathering was meant to be an essential, highly routine constitutional event. A massive master planning session covering the upcoming state ceremonies, succession protocols, and international diplomatic allegiances scheduled for the latter half of 2026. These closed-door sessions form the invisible scaffolding of the British monarchy, where every single detail of a royal appearance gets debated with absolute mathematical precision. Because inside the highly rigid structures of a constitutional kingdom, physical placement is never just a simple matter of convenience. Where a royal sits where they stand and the exact order they enter a room is the ultimate visible manifestation of raw political power, institutional precedence, and the unalterable royal line of succession. King Charles III, deeply understanding the profound symbolic weight of this summit, had left explicit, completely non-negotiable written instructions regarding the seating arrangements before his arrival. The absolute central position right at the main conference table, a seat traditionally reserved for the person of the highest ranking honour, and the clear symbolic representation of the true future of the crown, was explicitly designated for Catherine, the Princess of Wales. This was a deliberate, highly public endorsement directly from the king, carefully designed to signal to the entire household apparatus that the Princess of Wales was now the primary, indispensable face of the contemporary monarchy. Yet when the senior advisers and constitutional secretaries finally entered the Windsor briefing room, they discovered that the king's absolute mandate had been intentionally, defiantly violated. Queen Camilla had actually arrived early, completely bypassed the designated protocol charts, and taken physical possession of the central seat reserved for the Princess of Wales. When a senior royal equerry tried to politely intervene, pointing out the specific seating chart personally signed by the king, the Queen flatly refused to move, utilising her formidable status as the reigning Queen consort to completely silence the staff and assert her immediate dominance over the entire room. Just moments later, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, arrived at the threshold of the silent chamber. Witnessing the completely unexpected scene, the princess paused at the doorway, instantly registering the calculated political defiance inherent in the Queen's physical positioning. Instead of causing a scene or engaging in a public argument, or forcing the courtiers to choose sides in a visible palace mutiny, Princess Catherine demonstrated her exquisite and highly disciplined restraint that has truly come to define her entire royal career. She quietly stepped back, declined to enter the room, and chose to withdraw entirely from the immediate vicinity, successfully preventing a catastrophic, completely irreversible confrontation right in front of the assembled staff. Yet the silence of the princess did not mean the event was forgotten. The open defiance was quickly documented, verified, and compiled into a formal administrative dossier by the permanent secretaries present. This irrefutable evidence of a pre-planned systematic attempt by Queen Camilla to alter the official royal succession protocol was delivered directly to King Charles III, igniting a swift constitutional response that would forever alter the destiny of the British court. The irrefutable evidence delivered to the monarch did not merely document a brief passing breach of social etiquette, but rather exposed a deeply entrenched clandestine network of administrative manipulation that King Charles III simply could not afford to overlook. The dossier compiled by those permanent secretaries actually contained precise, unedited electronic logs, compromising internal communication transcripts and altered logistical directives, proving that Queen Camilla had systematically utilised her personal office to actively undermine the established sovereign hierarchy. For several months, subtle, quiet adjustments had been made to official travel itineraries. Diplomatic reception guest lists and national ceremonial seating arrangements, all carefully calculated to reduce the public prominence of the Princess of Wales, while elevating the presence of the Queen Consort. When King Charles III sat and reviewed these documents in his private study at Clarence House, the sudden realization was both devastating and profound. This was not some minor domestic dispute between a wife and a daughter-in-law, but an organised institutional challenge to the future stability of the British line of succession. The king deeply understood that the very legitimacy of a constitutional monarchy relies upon an unassailable, transparent order of precedence, and any attempt to distort that order from within represented a direct threat to the crown itself. The immediate reaction of the monarch was characterised by a cold, clinical determination that surprised even his closest constitutional advisers. King Charles III did not launch into a passionate, angry tirade, nor did he allow any public leaks to contaminate the British press. Instead, he quietly summoned Queen Camilla to his private office, ensuring that all staff members, private secretaries, and security personnel were strictly dismissed from the immediate corridor. The heavy mahogany doors were closed, sealing the two most powerful figures in the kingdom inside a chamber, stripped of all courtly pretense. On the desk directly between them lay the unvarnished, painful truth, the complete detailed dossier outlining the unauthorised modifications to the Windsor Castle summit and the broader pattern of administrative interference. The king presented the documentation quite clearly, asking his wife a single, direct question regarding whether she had been fully, completely aware that the central seat at the planning table had been explicitly reserved for Princess Catherine by royal command. The Queen, quickly realising that denial was impossible in the face of such comprehensive written evidence, looked directly at her husband and confirmed that she was indeed fully aware of the directive. According to the private notes of senior courtiers who have carefully analysed the dynamics of the palace throughout the current reign, what followed was a conversation marked by its terrifying quiet intensity. Those who know the king well are very aware that his most serious confrontations never involve shouting or dramatic gestures. The true weight of his sovereign authority is delivered through a soft, unyielding tone that leaves absolutely no room for negotiation or excuses. Queen Camilla, however, did not remain passive at all. She defended her actions by articulating a deeply personal, long-simmering grievance that had driven her to this desperate political manoeuvre. For over 3 long decades she had endured unprecedented public hostility, relentless media vitriol, and a brutal, exhausting fight to win even a shred of acceptance inside a royal establishment that had once locked her out of their world completely. She finally took the title of Queen Consort in 2022, surviving on grit and quiet patience. Yet she now felt a cold panic, watching the younger generation rise so fast. Princess Catherine was taking over the world stage with massive global adoration, leaving the Queen feeling like her own decades of quiet suffering were being wiped completely from the Windsor family history. The Queen made it very plain this was not about stopping the young royals, but a desperate panic over being completely forgotten. She felt they were shoving her into an early retirement, erasing her from public memory long before her time was up. King Charles III listened with real quiet sorrow. He knew the deep scars left behind by 30 years of public hatred. Yet his final answer was cold, closing down the argument instantly. He looked straight at his wife and said the crown was never meant to validate their long controversial love story. He reminded her that his absolute non-negotiable duty as king was to prepare the monarchy for the future that would come after he was gone, and that this sacred duty could never be bent for anyone, not even the woman he had spent his entire life shielding from the world. Hearing the hard edge in his voice, Queen Camilla made a sudden, devastating move to end her era. She unpinned a historic piece of royal insignia from her coat, set it heavily on the desk between them, and told the king she would not wear the symbols of a public role she was no longer allowed to actually live. Saying nothing more, the queen stood up, walked out of his private study and shut the door hard behind her, never once looking back. King Charles III was left in total silence with the paperwork and a choice that would alter his court forever. Within an hour he ignored the usual palace channels and called his constitutional secretariat the top legal office that turns royal decisions into absolute law. The gears of the state machine started turning immediately, working with a quiet, ruthless speed to lock in the change before the family or the global press caught wind. The final order was written with total, unshakable legal permanence, keeping a strict clause that made sure the total stripping of Queen Camilla's public duties could never be undone, no matter the health scares, emotional drama, or kingly absences. The brutal reality of this royal decree hit the offices of Westminster and Buckingham Palace early the very next morning. The King's orders brought a shocking total wipeout of the Queen's official public schedule. When her private team logged into the main digital calendars, they saw nothing but blank white space where a packed lineup of banquets, massive charities, and global royal tours had been just hours before. There were 0 notes, no explaining emails, and not a single brief given to her personal staff. The blank calendar was the message. Then the palace bosses instantly put the Queen's personal PR team under the direct, absolute control of the King's own media office. Every single press release, letter and public note under her name had to be approved by the King's top press chief before anyone could send it. The independent royal court Camilla had built over nearly 3 long years was totally torn down in less than a single working day, killing off her power inside the royal family forever. This quiet purging of the Queen Consort's staff was just phase 1 of a larger plan to stabilise the throne. King Charles III knew that while he had the absolute power to tear down his court structure, the ultimate survival of the crown meant everyone who would inherit this mess had to present a completely united front. To make sure of this, the king called the inner circle of the royal family to a sudden emergency briefing. Prince William, Princess Catherine, Princess Anne, and Prince Edward all showed up. And the wording of this meeting was very carefully chosen. This was absolutely not a family chat to find middle ground, but a formal state briefing meant to carve up the massive public roles, patronages and major duties that had been stripped from Queen Camilla in an instant. As they gathered, the room was thick with a tense, business-like silence. Prince William sat with a look of absolute cold determination. The heir to the crown had watched the quiet fighting inside the palace walls for months, and he had reached a hard conclusion. He truly believed the survival of the Windsor name in the 21st century rested on a clear, completely obvious and unquestioned line of power. Any confusion over who held the top ceremonial spotlight was no longer just an annoyance, it was a major risk to the crown. William put his full vocal weight right behind his father's hard decision, knowing they had to protect the future of the throne from any competing family agendas. But Princess Catherine's personal reaction was much more quiet and deeply weighed. As the private secretaries handed out the brand new master schedule, which slapped her name right on the biggest state banquets and royal ceremonies once belonging to the Queen Consort, the princess sat in total silence. She fully understood the crushing mental and political weight of the massive role they were forcing onto her. She knew a sudden flashy promotion would look to the public like a cruel victory over an older beaten woman, a look that could ruin her hard-won image of quiet duty. Catherine pulled William aside in private, insisting there must be absolutely no public celebration of any kind. There was no smug press coverage and absolutely no loud media campaigns showing off her fresh, complete control over the ceremonial court. She demanded the handover look completely natural, smooth, and driven entirely by royal necessity, rather than her own personal ambition. Princess Anne, widely known as the most disciplined, hard-working royal of them all, delivered her final devastating verdict during the family summit. She stared right at her brother the king and told him that royal discipline must apply to his inner circle just as harshly as it did to anyone else in the country. Anne argued that trying to protect Queen Camilla from the fallout of her massive power grab would not actually save this royal marriage. Instead, it would destroy the crown's authority forever. Prince Edward stayed completely quiet, but his heavy, silent nod confirmed that the entire family stood totally united against her. The core family had reached a complete consensus, making sure this new decree was backed by the heavy, united weight of the dynasty. King Charles III signed the final constitutional papers, looked up at his son, and gave a chilling warning that would echo forever. The person who sits on this throne must never confuse their personal feelings with their actual heavy constitutional duty. That final royal signature on the official decree immediately triggered a swift, cold wave of changes. While high-ranking palace bosses worked frantically to secure this new setup, the harsh, mechanical reality of the decision crashed down on the staff members. They were the ones who actually ran the daily grind of the royal court. The first real signs of this massive shift hit the private offices in Westminster and London, where the Queen Consort had run her personal headquarters for nearly 3 years. By early afternoon, top officials from the Central Palace Directory marched in with official written orders. Evict her immediately. The era was over. Inside the Queen's private rooms, a heavy, silent finality took over, completely shocking her loyal personal aides. Security guards hauled in massive, heavy wooden packing crates, and a team of palace archivists immediately began the cold, systematic process of stripping her desks bare, cataloguing private letters and packing up her personal life. Every single item taken out of those rooms carried a painful, heavy weight, proof that her rival parallel court, the one that dared to challenge the true line of succession, was being systematically destroyed. Framed photos were pulled from the walls one by one, leaving nothing but blank, dusty squares on the fabric of the historic staterooms. When a young assistant went to grab a large, historic portrait of King Charles III Queen, Camilla stepped forward and stopped him with a soft, quiet gesture. She took the heavy frame into her own hands, clutching it tight while the packers buzzed around her. This was the man who had protected her for almost her entire life, staying by her side through decades of public hatred and brutal media abuse, storms that would have easily broken anyone else. Yet his signature on that official decree, now landing in the inbox of every top courtier, was the exact thing that authorized this total, brutal eviction. The irony was total, devastating, and absolute. A brutal reminder that in this cold monarchy, the crown must always outlast the fragile person wearing it. As the afternoon went on, more official paperwork arrived from the head offices, systematically slicing away the Queen's once massive public role. A massive network of national charities, military groups, and historic clubs that once answered to Camilla received letters signed directly by the head of the civil service. These letters spelled it out clearly: the Queen Consort would no longer serve as their official royal patron or representative. Instead, those prestigious public roles were officially handed right over to Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. Every single piece of mail was a small, quiet confirmation that she was gone for good, banished for the rest of this reign. The Queen slowly flipped through the pages of the updated state calendar, watching her name get completely erased from major national events. The state opening of Parliament, formal dinners for foreign leaders, and historic processions had all been carefully redesigned by palace officials to keep her far away. Her name was completely gone from the official order of precedence, and she was banned from the royal carriages. She would never again walk beside the king during the grand opening ceremonies of the nation, or sit in the historic chair of state that had been her right since the coronation back in May of 2023. This devastating loss of power was no longer a secret whisper discussed behind closed doors. It was a cold, hard administrative reality burned directly into the British government. Late that evening, once the final administrative work was done, King Charles III walked slowly down the long silent hallway toward those private offices. He paused right outside the door that had served as his wife's command centre, staring blankly at the empty spot where her personal logo had been ripped down just hours earlier. Witnesses in the hall noticed that the king stood in complete agonizing silence for a few long moments. His eyes were locked on the handle, but he never tried to enter. The sheer agonizing weight of his choice showed in his slumped shoulders, a brutal physical toll paid just to keep his solemn constitutional promise intact. No advisers were allowed to pass notes between their separate apartments that night, and not a single official word was leaked to the international media. Instead, a quiet handwritten note was delivered to the Queen's rooms by a trusted page, asking her to meet him at sunrise in the tiny garden room downstairs. He chose that spot on purpose for its complete isolation, a simple space stripped of titles, official papers, and prying staff. As the sun finally went down over London, the palace had finished the cold work that royal survival demanded. At the next sunrise, King Charles would finally have to face the brutal reality of his own cold royal decree. He had to balance the merciless crown with the raw truth of his own marriage. When King Charles III walked into the small garden room at dawn, the silence was heavy and absolute. No private secretaries stood nearby to arrange the official documents on the wooden table. No personal aides guarded the heavy glass doors to watch the empty corridor, and not a single senior royal was positioned nearby to steer the conversation or stop it. The king had arrived early, sitting all by himself in the pale morning light that crept through the high windows overlooking the private lawns of the massive estate. Minutes passed. Then Queen Camilla entered, walking with a slow, heavy dignity. In her hands, she carried the large framed photo of her husband that she had taken off her office wall just yesterday. For the first time since the official decree had been finalized by the constitutional lawyers, the two most famous people in the entire country stood completely face to face, stripped of the rigid palace protocols that had dictated their lives for decades. Those who have watched the couple for decades knew this was never going to be a normal meeting. What happened in that quiet room was not some dry administrative business negotiation. Queen, Camilla did not enter that room to beg for her public status back, nor did she demand he reverse his final sovereign decision. She knew the legal papers Charles signed were completely final. Instead, she wanted to ask one heavy, painful question that the official constitutional documents had completely left out. Demanding to know if her husband was banishing her forever because her own recent behaviour had embarrassed the monarchy, or if he was doing this because he simply did not trust her loyalty anymore. King Charles answered his wife with a quiet, incredibly painful honesty that matched the heavy gravity of the moment. He looked at her and said his love had never wavered. This agonizing choice was not about personal rejection, and it did not come from a place of emotional coldness. He explained that the decision was driven entirely by his heavy constitutional duties as the reigning king, obligations that he simply could not ignore. These duties existed completely apart from any human love he felt as her husband. The rapid rise and soaring popularity of Princess Catherine was not some calculated plot to overshadow the Queen or wipe away her achievements, but was instead a vital survival strategy that the modern British monarchy desperately needed to secure its long-term future. A grand design that could not be stopped by his own personal feelings. Queen Camilla listened to his words in total silence, and then she gave a reply her husband never saw coming. Looking right at him, she said she understood, showing a deep, painful vulnerability that she had kept hidden from the world for her entire adult life. She explained that she had spent almost her whole life fighting for just a sliver of acceptance, enduring endless public mockery, bitter hatred, and complete isolation. She had survived decades of intense public hatred just to stand beside him as his queen consort. But watching the quick, effortless rise of Princess Catherine had triggered a deep, terrifying panic in her chest. Her chaotic behaviour at Windsor Castle was driven by a desperate, raw panic that all her past sacrifices would be forgotten and her entire legacy instantly wiped out the moment the young royals took over, with a quiet finality. The Queen placed the framed photo onto the wooden table between them, whispering that she would stop fighting the rise of Catherine, the Princess of Wales. She promised there would be no more fights over palace schedules, no behind-the-scenes family pressure, and no petty schemes over who stands where. No more quiet scheming behind closed doors. The bitter war for power and influence inside the palace was permanently over. King Charles then outlined the protective measures that would remain in place, confirming that she would always remain his legal wife. She would keep her private apartments, and her personal dignity would be fiercely protected, even though her official public role as queen consort was now over forever. When the public saw the working members of the royal family step out together for the first time after, the massive change, her empty space at the centre of the ceremony, spoke much louder than any official palace statement ever could. King Charles walked forward to occupy his lonely spot as the reigning monarch, while Prince William and Princess Catherine stepped front and centre into their new, highly prominent roles. Princess Anne stood in her usual spot nearby, keeping the strict stoic posture that the survival of the crown demanded, while Camilla watched from a hidden room stripped of her royal robes and national titles. The public reaction was instantly split down the middle, showcasing the deep, messy conflicts of the modern royal family. Many saw the king's swift move as real proof that the crown could enforce strict discipline and accountability, even among its most senior members, making sure that even the most protected royals fall in line behind the needs of the state. Others disagreed. They argued that the king had cruelly sacrificed his own wife to protect an outdated institution, saying no crown is worth the devastating human cost of this public exile. Both sides had a point, but both missed the real lesson here. Being close to the throne gives you absolutely zero protection from its ruthless demands. The dramatic shift in power during the summer of 2026 proved one thing: the cold machinery of the British crown cares nothing about personal feelings or shared history. The royal family put on a massive show of grand public pageantry during the Trooping the Colour ceremony on June 13th. 2026 and those glittering royal ascot processions from June 16th to June 20th, 2026 were just a flawless corporate facade. To the millions of fans watching the traditional carriage processions and those waving balcony appearances, the visible unity of King Charles III and Queen Camilla suggested an unshakable, permanent stability. But behind that brilliant display of silk dresses and heavy military uniforms, the actual administrative power had already been completely rewritten. The public only saw what the firm wanted them to see to keep national confidence high, while the internal mechanisms of power continued their cold, clinical transition away from the old guard. This masterfully managed illusion reached its definitive climax on Thursday, June 25th, 2026, when the official announcement about Buckingham Palace was released to the global media. By framing the shock decision to abandon the sovereign's traditional imperial seat as a progressive triumph for public access and fiscal efficiency, Prince William's clever advisory team successfully transformed a painful, deep domestic separation into a massive public relations victory. The public reality that the King and Queen would remain pretty much confined to Clarence House was easily embraced by a nation preoccupied with serious economic challenges, completely unaware that this geographic isolation effectively stripped Queen Camilla of her potential status as the undisputed matriarch of the official imperial palace. Instead, Buckingham Palace was quietly reserved to serve as the grand executive headquarters for the future reign of the Prince and Princess of Wales. while Clarence House basically became a gilded sanctuary of early retirement, separating the physical presence of the reigning monarch from the active daily governance of the state. At the same time, the strategic release of the king's personal tax figures provided the perfect political shield to protect the monarchy from growing allegations of stagnation. The astonishing disclosure of his £12.9 million contribution to the public treasury fully satisfied the modern demand for financial transparency, buying the crucial public goodwill needed to justify the king's rapidly accelerating withdrawal from the grueling demands of heavy national state appearances. With the public completely distracted by the massive financial ledger and the nice narrative of a modern, cost-conscious sovereign, the true administrative power centre of the country quietly completed its relocation to Adelaide Cottage over in Windsor. Prince William and Princess Catherine emerged from this quiet crisis not as ambitious, greedy usurpers, but as the indispensable, dutiful saviours of a rapidly transitioning state holding the real keys to executive power, while the king remained safely isolated within his chosen domestic retreat. In the final assessment of this historic transformation, the words that King Charles III delivered to his heir during the closing moments of that tense constitutional briefing echo as the defining doctrine of the modern House of Windsor. The king's sharp warning that a reigning sovereign must never mistake personal affection for actual constitutional responsibility outlines the precise, cold, unsentimental code that has allowed the British monarchy to survive through centuries of brutal political revolution. The Crown remains a survival machine driven entirely by the strict law of continuity. It is a system that demands the absolute subordination of individual happiness to the preservation of the royal lineage. Queen Camilla, despite her decades of patience, loyalty, and quiet endurance, ultimately hit the same unyielding constitutional barrier that had previously claimed the fates of so many royal predecessors who tried to prioritize personal desires over institutional protocols. The modern royal court now stands completely redefined its internal balance of power, definitively tilted toward the future. Princess Catherine now carries the massive heavy weight of her expanded national responsibilities, stepping forward as the undisputed ceremonial and symbolic core of this contemporary country, wearing those historic sapphire insignias that represent her unique status as the primary face of the modern British state. The long-term consequences of this quiet, dramatic revolution will continue to unfold across the political landscape for generations to come as the public watches to see how the next monarch actually uses the vast executive authority that has been consolidated during this intense period of transition. The ongoing story of the House of Windsor has entered a sophisticated new chapter, proving once again that while the human actors change, the throne itself remains eternal cold and entirely unyielding in its ruthless pursuit of survival.